oh, we never saw anything inappropriate. We side with the victims and it's garbage. Gosh, I mean, they've just ratcheted down the genocide. So it's not continuing at the same pace, but it is continuing with the same devastating effects.
I find myself exasperated even about what I'm supposed to be doing here on the show.
But he got seduced by that world, those jets, the dinners with Woody Allen.
Why do I feel like I'm being told no? Why do I feel like there's a disagreement between us? They could literally kill Don Lemon in prison, and there's not a thing anybody can do about it. The expectation that the ball is going to have less velocity at some point in the future as opposed to right now.
I don't have that expectation. I want to make life as difficult for them as I possibly can. Maybe there's deep fakes all over the... If you see one saying that I'm a Marxist-Leninist, it's definitely an AI.
All right, well, let's get you in and out of here then.
Okay, I'm doing the final edit on my last chapter. So I told you what we're doing, right?
Remind me.
That so Joe Sacco and I were in Egypt, and we interviewed 29 families from Gaza, and
Right.
we're writing the story of the genocide through the experiences of those families.
Oh gosh, that must be.
Yeah, it's even though I did the interviews, there are days I just got to stop. I can't keep doing it. He's the same with drawing it.
I can't imagine. I'm so sorry, Chris, but it seems so, obviously worthwhile.
Oh, I think it's essential. I mean, Joe called me maybe 2-3 weeks into the genocide. He said, we have to do a book.
Yeah.
Neither of us want to deal with it, but I mean, it's our attempt to fight the erasure. And also both of us spent so much time in Gaza. We know Gaza,
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, you would think that there would be humanitarian organizations, the UN, that were trying to record this for the purpose of there being some kind of legal accountability down the line, or either from a kind of ethnographic, historical perspective. Do you feel like you're filling a void because that sort of thing just isn't happening at all?
Yeah, I mean, people maybe afterwards will do stuff. I don't know. I mean, Francesca Albanese's done some good stuff and B'Tselem, but I don't think there's a lot going on right now. I mean, you had some Palestinians have written some good stuff. Atif Abu Saif, Don't Look Left, but not quite like what we're doing. No. I mean, this is names and dates and times. I mean, it's more impressionistic or maybe individual testimonies, but this is, it's more exhaustive. I mean, we had over 500 pages of transcripts we're working off of.
I mean, as you're working on that and observing the way that Gaza has been pushed out of the media cycle by any number of other stories, many of which are genuinely important and deserve coverage as well, that has to be incredibly dissonant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just they slowed the pace of the genocide down. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, I'll go ahead and intro you.
Okay.
I'm extremely humbled and grateful to be joined by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author Chris Hedges. Welcome back to Bad Faith Podcast.
Thanks, Brianna.
We were just talking about this incredibly important book project that you're working on that is offering a kind of a contemporaneous account of what people in Gaza are going through as the media has largely turned its attention to what seems like crisis after crisis unfolding over the last series of weeks. Before we get into some of that other news, is there anything that you would want the audience to sort of keep an eye on as they are being pulled in different directions by an absolutely insane news cycle?
Yeah, Gaza. I mean, they've just ratcheted down the genocide. So it's not continuing at the same pace, but it is continuing with the same devastating effects for Palestinians who don't have clean water, don't have access to medical facilities, are living in appalling conditions. It's winter in Gaza, and it's rainy and cold, and people are dying not only of malnutrition, but from the cold, especially infants and the elderly. So this sham peace plan that Trump trotted out, and that unfortunately the Security Council passed with the abstentions of Russia and China, and it's a joke. It's just a cover for Israel, and the scaling down of the killing. I mean, Israel was killing up to 250 people a day, but they're still killing. A dozen here, a dozen there. I think the numbers are over 400, maybe over 500 since the quote unquote ceasefire was put into effect. And Israel is now turning up the heat on the West Bank. So I think for those of us who come out of the Middle East, I spent 7 years in the Middle East, I spent significant time in Gaza. It's frustrating that the the subterfuge of the quote unquote peace plan by Trump has diverted attention from this humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah, there was a way that the existence of the electoral cycle in 2024 seemed to create some sort of at least possibility of a lever for pressure against Joe Biden and later Kamala Harris. Certainly the argument was being made, an argument that they obviously both ignored, that the path toward victory was through an arms embargo against Israel, stopping both military and financial support and offering political cover within the UN for Israel. And then that's what the left and the broad anti-war segment of the United States public, of the voting public, was advocating for. After Trump's win, I'll just speak for myself, it feels almost like what is it, futile to make a demand of an administration that has shown such total indifference. So I wonder if you see any opportunities to advocate for Palestine through a political realm, or should we be focusing exclusively on the kind of boycotts that we've seen happening overseas against shipping weapons to Israel and other kinds of sort of extra electoral organization?
Yeah, well, if you haven't figured it out by now, neither the Democrats or the Republicans give a damn about any of us.
Sure.
77% of registered Democrats wanted a halt to arms shipments to Israel. The Harris campaign, the DNC didn't care. And about the same percentages want release of the Epstein files, which are not getting released, so that they can protect not only Trump, but lots of other figures, including, of course, Netanyahu. So the only response now, it's why I went to Italy in November with Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur on Palestine, Yanis Varoufakis, Greta Thunberg, and others, to join the dock workers in Genoa who carried out a strike and are refusing to load ships with weapons bound for Israel. That's all we have left. We see heroic resistance in Minneapolis, but at the same time, the Trump administration and ICE have defied, I think it's 96 court orders. So if you don't have a court system that functions to uphold the rule of law, if you have a Congress that's utterly supine, if you have a press that is owned by billionaires like Jeff Bezos, who just, of course, destroyed the Washington Post, or Larry Ellison, who's now destroying CBS. I mean, I find a kind of delight in that Bari Weiss story, because CBS was utterly obsequious to Israeli propaganda. They just weren't obsequious enough. So they throw in Weiss, who's a human hand grenade, to take down what's left, which is what's happening. So, we have to begin to, Ken, that's why I went to Italy. We have to begin to carry out sustained acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, as the courageous citizens of Minneapolis have done, but we have to do that on a national level, and especially as in front of our eyes, the state is building a paramilitary force in the form of ICE that replicates the paramilitary forces in all dictatorships, Modi, whether it's pulling from the RSS, Erdogan in Turkey, Sisi. Also, these people are out. So these goons are outside. They're not police. They're armed. Their faces are covered. They're snatching American citizens or killing American citizens on the streets of their city. I covered Pinochet's Chile. I remember being in a demonstration and these unmarked cars pulled up and these thugs got out with their faces covered and they literally bundled, kidnapped people in front of us, shoved them in the cars, and who knows if they ever came back. That's the world that is rapidly being consolidated in front of us in the United States. That if you want to know how dysfunctional the American system is, compare it to what's happening in the UK with Starmer, who was not listed in the Epstein files, but is tainted because of his appointment to the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Great Britain, who is all over the Epstein files. Our system doesn't function anymore. It doesn't. There's not even a pretense of democracy. And if we're going to save ourselves, then it is going to be by carrying out the kinds of protests that we see on the streets of Minneapolis, but it's got to be writ large across the whole country. Otherwise, we're finished and we don't have much time left.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating. I mean, as you know, we've had conversations along these lines on the podcast, and I feel like I've been beating a dead horse for years. But, if it wasn't Gaza that proved that there was no real red line, that there was no accountability left, if it wasn't the choice being made by Democrats in the face of what they described as an existential threat from Donald Trump to not do what was required to actually win the election, which is even just to lie about caring about the genocide. Right. If it wasn't the fact that, when Bernie said, I've said this before, and I feel like some kind of Opie sap for believing, but when Bernie says 68,000 people die every year from a lack of health insurance, preventable deaths, and we can do something about this through a Medicare for All program, which is overwhelmingly popular, which has 88% of support from Democrats and 49% from Republicans and 60-odd% of independents, and we still choose not to do it year after year after year. And there's no political accountability for the fact that our elected officials are so bought off. When we haven't raised the minimum wage since 2009, the longest period of time in the history of the minimum wage, when all of these things are happening that are obviously much less visceral and horrifying than genocide, but nonetheless have the consequence of tens of thousands of lives being lost as well, and untold immiseration. And not even to get into the environmental effects and the Rachel Curie's and the, all of the people that predated and anticipated the acceleration that has been the last years of genocide in Gaza. The writing was on the wall for a very long time. The cop cities. And to now hear increasing, new news reports about the choice of ICE to buy up all of these warehouse facilities that are of a scope and scale that suggest warehousing not just of undocumented people, but American citizens as well. And the alarm bells are sort of ringing and people are upset and polls suggest enormous political dissatisfaction. And yet the actions of the American public don't change. It gives me enormous pause. And when you rightly point out the kinds of actions that could be helpful and that are being implemented in places like Italy, and when we look to the United States where we don't have the same sort of union density or culture of union participation anymore, I do wonder, having had such proximity to other sorts of authoritarian moments in other countries around the world, how you're feeling about the likelihood that there will be a tipping point where the American public fights back. And if that never happens, what you predict the future is going to look like for us.
Well, if you look at authoritarian regimes, it's always incremental because they have to dismantle state structures like the judiciary, which Trump is doing, for instance. You have to dismantle law enforcement so it becomes ideologically driven and essentially perpetuates the cult around the leader. That's why you see that within the Justice Department, the requirements that you're a Trump loyalist. So because it's incremental, by the time it's cemented into place and there's widespread understanding of what's happened, it's too late. That's just the story everywhere. It was the story with the rise of Nazism. It took Hitler took power in January 1933. It really took 38 around there, 5 years for the Nazis to consolidate power by essentially destroying independent institutions and making them loyal to the Nazi Party. The same was also true with the rise of Stalinism. Solzhenitsyn writes about it in the Gulag Archipelago. So because it's incremental and because a population is unfamiliar with that kind of authoritarian or totalitarian control, it although of course in Russia you had Tsarism, but the moment that the public wakes up, they're shackled, and that's and I think you raise a very important point about union density. The only way to really fight and thwart this kind of power are nationwide strikes. They work because we have the numbers. We don't have anything else, but we have the numbers. We have the ability to shut down commerce. We have the ability to shut down government if we use it. That requires numbers. It usually requires robust labor unions, which are usually the tip of the spear for this kind of stuff. But it also requires a political consciousness. And that worries me. We've lost the political consciousness. People are not schooled in the revolutionary theory of the past. Luxemburg, Marx, Engels, Gramsci, etc. Why is that important? Because they fought the same kinds of systems that we fought. And they, we can learn from their experience and learn from their mistakes. But, we've severed ourselves largely from a print-based culture. I spent a lot of time writing about this. It's my book, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle. And what that does, to steal a line from Hannah Arendt, is it creates rootlessness. You don't know where you came from. You don't know who you are. You don't know who your ancestors are. You don't know what your ancestors did. And by that, I'm not talking about the mythical version of American history. I'm talking about the great resistance, liberation fighters, whether it's Malcolm X or Eugene V. Debs or the abolitionists or the great labor union leaders, the Wobblies. We had the bloodiest labor wars of any industrialized country. Hundreds of American workers were killed. Now, thousands were blacklisted. They fought they laid down their lives in many cases for safe conditions in mines and the 8-hour workday and the right to organize. It's all gone. It's gone. And that has left us powerless at a very precarious moment in American history. So that's very frightening. I mean, if you look at the breakdown of capitalism in the 1930s, we had robust radical movements, including the Communist Party, which has been, I'm not a communist, but has been written out of American history. And so I'm extremely concerned and honestly very pessimistic. I mean, I think that it's a real discussion as to whether the midterm elections will be fair. I think that's a real discussion. And at that point, it's over. There's no way out.
Can I confess that over the years, there has been a sort of what feels like a circular argument that's made about unions. For one, there is a lot of skepticism and even sort of vitriol directed at any leftist who even raises the idea of a general strike. Not, oh, let's have one tomorrow, mind you. I don't think anyone is so naive as to not understand what it would require. But even having conversations whose purpose I viewed as familiarizing the public with what can be done and incentivizing the organization that needs to happen, were very much derided as naive. For years, this has been going on. People who've been listening to the podcast know what I'm talking about. And even people that I like Hassan Piker, have engaged in that sort of dismissiveness. It feels like in this moment, it is increasingly an unpopular idea. You saw the mayor of Chicago talk about it at the mic. You've, heard people take it more seriously in a way that feels a little, I am hopeful about. That being said, part of the frustration of the circular discussion of unions that I've experienced even hosting this show is that a leftist will come on and emphasize the importance of unions and then in the same breath say, but we can't do the strike right now because we don't have sufficient union density. And there doesn't seem to be really an off-ramp about what to do about that. The only path forward is through unions, and also we don't have any union density, and also the fights are hard. And there have been some progress, obviously. Chris Malls has been on the show a bunch of times. We've covered Collectivo coffee workers and Starbucks and nurses and teachers and the like. But still we are where we are. And recently, and I'm curious what you think about this, I have been wondering if sometimes a historical legacy can be a little bit, or, understanding what has worked in the past can artificially narrow what we're conceiving of as what could be the path in the future. And I do wonder sometimes about whether or not there's been, and I'm sure there has been, but a lot of contemplation of what it looks like to grind the gears of profit to a halt outside of a labor context. So, for example, an idea that I floated in a sort of a panel with activists that I had a couple of months ago was to look at these No King protests and say it's very frustrating that we just walk around in circles around the Washington Monument, and then a Democrat comes into the TV the next day and brags about how undisruptive the protests were. What if the protests were disruptive? What if we blocked streets? What if we blocked, let's say, a Whole Foods, Amazon store's inability to accept truck deliveries and produce? We're not Amazon workers, right? I don't belong to a union. But is there a potentiality of the public operating in ways that people who actually worked for these institutions, for these companies, used to operate?
I think it's hard. So you brought up the No Kings March. These are flash mobs. It's like the pussy hats or whatever they were wearing.
Yeah.
The first Trump administration, they don't care about flash mobs. They're irrelevant. So the problem is that if you're trying to build a national strike, it requires infrastructure and organization. It's not something you do quickly. I'm very good friends with Roger Hallam, who founded Extinction Rebellion and then Just Stop Oil. They shut down the M25 motorway. Roger wasn't even on the motorway. He was involved in organizing the seizure of the motorway. That's the big artery around London. It really disrupted London's commerce and business. And they gave him a 5-year prison sentence. So you can usually tell what's effective by how they react.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. I keep bringing up Jessica Resniak. I'm sorry, you guys keep telling me I'm pronouncing her name wrong, and I need to fix that. I apologize. But the woman who got 9 years for chaining herself to the oil pipeline.
Right.
And that's part of why I've been so frustrated about the sort of indifference to the ratcheting up of criminal penalties for protest, the cop city expansion, because that all seems to be obviously an indication of what works, exactly like what you just said.
Yeah. Cop City is a good example of what works, which is why they came down like a ton of bricks on Cop City. They were charged with terrorism charges, weren't they? They got a bunch of people under RICO charges, I think, for like distributing circulars, like flyers. Right. I think also for fundraising. I think the terrorism charges were for doing like a GoFundMe to get people to raise bail money. Right. So it's very hard once you confront the power of the state without an organization. It's extremely difficult. I've seen this. I was 20 years overseas watching courageous labor leaders carry out these kinds of activities. Student organization is also key, which is why they shut down the encampments and turned universities like Columbia into, police camps. You can't even get on the campus. The NYPD can go in anytime they want. They've shut down free speech. They've turned their Middle Eastern department over to receiver and just completely capitulated to the state. So you can always tell what works by how the state responds. And can there be a national strike? In essence, you're asking without union or strong organizations, I suppose. But the problem is when they come after you, you're going to need that. You're going to need a body by which you can sustain resistance and confront the militarized power of the state. National strikes. If you go back and look at revolutions, that's what brought down the Tsar. That's what brought down the Shah in Iran. That's what brought down Baptista in Cuba. You glorify the revolutionaries like Fidel or the Bolsheviks, but that's not what actually, when you look closely at the history, what broke the power of the regimes. It's when the vast majority of the population refused to cooperate. So you can get to a point of, the problem is that national response has to be twinned with a national consciousness. And often the consciousness comes too late. That's the fear. And why? So I think I just want to say one thing. I think we do have to deeply study Marx, and I'm not a Marxist actually, but Marx's and Engels' analysis of capitalism. It's extremely important that we invest the time in that. It's extremely important that we understand Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony. Rosa Luxemburg was an amazing figure. She turned on Lenin and the Bolsheviks very early. How do you create a resistance movement that remains democratic? That's the fundamental question she asks. This is really important as we go forward because we are confronting the monolith of state power and trying to build, in essence, at this point, an alternative system. And I think it's been disastrous. I mean, Cornel West and Richard Wolff and I held a series of lectures on many of these great revolutionary theorists because we want people to read them. We want people, and you're right. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And there is these people have carried that banner for us, and it's incumbent upon us to lift that banner up from them. The socialists, the Wobblies, these are the real heroes. All the people Howard Zinn writes about in his book, and that you won't read about in a high school textbook on history. But these are the real heroes, the real figures. The King was the figurehead, but all the amazing civil rights activists, from Rosa Parks and everyone else. We need to know who these people are because they held up the light and they suffered for it, and they confronted the same configurations of power we have to confront, and they paid terrible prices for it.
Yeah, that's what it feels like sometimes. And I don't mean to harp on. Okay, what I feel like sometimes is that the history gets told, even by people who ostensibly share my politics. The history gets told in a way that is ultimately putting the brakes on people's action, putting the brakes on action. So the history is told. Labor unions did X. We don't have labor unions, so stop. What I got excited by, or general strikes are hard. They need organization, so don't talk about a general strike. What I find exciting, frankly, is when you start talking about, there was sort of a political consciousness. The people decided they were no longer going to be complicit. They were going to be ungovernable, and that's how they overthrew, and then you listed a number of regimes, Iran, the Tsar, etc. And I want to stay there for a second, because just before that you said, well, it requires a certain amount of organization. It requires some support for the folks who get thrown into jail for these disproportionate prison sentences, or worse, who get killed. What does that look like? Is it true, frankly, I'm asking you, that there was some legal aid organization that had to have a certain amount of money in a pot before, the Tsar was overthrown? It doesn't feel, it feels more like, look, I don't want to sound naive or indifferent to the consequences and the price that people will pay and have paid. But waiting around for a time where there are zero consequences seems obviously futile. And identifying the point at which we're saying, no, we're allowed to act now without waiting for some undetermined strike fund or undetermined legal support or undetermined whatever it is to manifest, that waiting feels fundamentally counter-revolutionary, and at its worst, sort of like perfect op material for the left to prevent us from actually striving to achieve anything.
I don't advocate waiting. I think we should be out there now. So I don't advocate waiting at all.
So what do you think we should be out there doing now?
I think we should.
Because I'm telling you, when I raised this idea of doing stop oil style let's just move this protest into the street.
Yeah.
Let's just move it around the Whole Foods.
We have. I mean, the most important imperative right now is breaking ice. We don't break ice; we're shackled. And so,
all right,
what is happening in Minneapolis has to happen in every city in America. That's the point.
Which is specifically because Minneapolis is obviously being made an example of, right? It's being targeted by the Trump administration as a sanctuary city, as they've been focusing on the Somali immigrants. They're making an example of Minneapolis.
ICE is operating everywhere. I mean, I live in Princeton. They just grabbed some poor father who dropped his kid off at school.
And so, what do you see in Minneapolis that you would like to see across the country?
They're in the street. They're documenting it. They're attempting to keep outside the hotels where these ICE goons spend the night. They're playing loud music to keep them up all night.
Yeah.
I mean, every way through nonviolence, every way that we can make their life difficult is what we have to do. That's it. And I think it's kind of the perfect storm with the creation of ICE, which is now getting more money than any other law enforcement agency in the country. And you're right about the warehouses. Anybody who thinks these are for undocumented workers are really in la la land. I mean, they are just so naive. It's almost beyond belief. I know this is the classic pattern of how authoritarian states consolidate power. And that is what is happening in front of us very quickly. And I don't believe in waiting. I'm just arguing that we're weak, unfortunately. And even the labor organizations we have are weak and compromised. So many of the strikes that have succeeded, go back to the West Virginia teachers, those are wildcat strikes. The labor union leaders didn't support them. It was also true on the West Coast. So I'm just pointing out that the stark reality that we don't have the kind of organizational structure, political consciousness, or institutional structures that assisted people in the past. We don't have them. And it's certainly not the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic, one point on the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was calling out the rise of authoritarianism, and that, of course, they're not wrong. The problem is they won't call for the one mechanism that can bring down Trump and the administration, which is mass mobilization, because nobody wants the leaders of the Democratic Party. And if you empowered mass mobilizations, in essence, popular movements, the Democratic Party leadership, Schumer, Pelosi, all these Jeffries, they'd all be pushed aside because nobody wants them. And so they won't do it. Although I just saw some Democratic figure, Raskin, I don't know who it was, saying if they shut down the elections, we have to have a national strike, which was interesting because at least they recognize the one mechanism that might save us. But the Democratic Party, which gave us Trump, let's be clear. I mean, the Democratic Party provided the political dysfunction that vomited up Trump. We can't wait. I think waiting is a terrible idea. On the other hand, we have to face the facts that the oligarchs and the billionaire class have really effectively shorn us of power. And that goes back to the 1971 Powell memo. They've done a really good job of capturing our institutions, universities, the press, of marginalizing radical voices like Chomsky, who unfortunately is in the Epstein files. But Noam was virtually blacklisted. I mean, you never heard him at all. I mean, in fact, there was a rule, unwritten, but it was understood that you didn't even put his name in the New York Times. His name was not allowed to be in the New York Times. So these kinds of critics of neoliberalism, of corporate capitalism, Michael Parenti just died, but Howard Zinn, they got blanked out. They got shut out. So no, we can't. Waiting is a bad idea. Waiting for something is a bad idea. But when I was in Genoa, you had organized dock workers, and it was really interesting because these dock workers are huge, big, burly guys, and they didn't play around. I mean, they were and they're most of them are Marxists. Yeah, you don't mess around with these guys. I mean, it's not me and my neighbors in Princeton putting on a fluffy hat and going down to the mall. It's a whole different animal.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess maybe this is just a framing issue for me, but I can't control a lot of things, but I can influence the sense of public political consciousness, right? I'm in the media. That's the sphere in which I feel like I have the most influence. And I feel disinclined to, I obviously understand what is meant when you say we are weak. I find myself resisting that. We are diminished in terms of our labor capacity, but I am inspired by the argument that it only takes 3% of the population. I am inspired by the fact that so many people are galvanized enough to join these protests, whether for Palestine or No Kings or whatever, even if I wish they were being mobilized and utilized differently. Epstein keeps coming up as a recurring theme. We were talking about Israel. Epstein comes up. We're talking about Noam Chomsky. Epstein comes up. And there's a way that has been galvanizing for folks across the political spectrum. I don't know if you saw, I think it was it Lori Ingraham, or it was one of the Republican blondes who was taking the temperature at TPUSA, asking the crowd whether or not they feel like the Trump administration has done enough on Epstein. And they overwhelmingly were frustrated and booed at the idea that what he's done and what the release has been sufficient.
How many of you are satisfied? You can clap. Satisfied with the results of the Epstein investigation? Clap. Okay, I told you to clap. You guys aren't listening. I'm not going to grade you on a curve. So I was going to get to that. How many of you are not satisfied with the results of the investigation?
That all of that energy is ripe for being ignited into a greater public consciousness if people are told what their remaining power is. And I want to be someone who informs people of how much power they have, not to even unwittingly sort of discourage folks from feeling like they have some, that they're limited in these ways just because of their historical counterparts might have had a different sort of organizing, sort of organizing conditions.
I mean, I totally sympathize with that, except if we're gonna confront power, we have to also do so with a clear understanding of the political reality around us. If we have a kind of Pollyannish view of our own capacity or to bring down power or anything else, then you're going to get trapped in the kind of emotional highs and lows that characterize American society. This is going to be
how so?
Because
what would be a Pollyannish?
Because
what is Pollyannish about? Yeah, go ahead.
Because at your first defeat or your second defeat, you don't recognize that this is for the long haul. The long distance revolutionary. And it's going to be nasty. These people are not playing around. Forget ICE. Forget.
Well, who's to say? I feel like I caveated a bunch about not being dismissive or indifferent to the incredible cost that will have to be paid. But this is what I mean. This is what I mean, Chris. Like every time it's like a conversation about, okay, now what are we going to do? It becomes, it's going to be really hard and people are going to be hurt and don't be Pollyanna about it. Okay, where do I sign an acknowledgement?
But Brianna, that's what the civil rights, that's why they all were trained. I mean, they knew what Bull Connor was going to do. And I'm just saying we should be hard-headed and prepared. I'm not saying that we should wait. I don't think waiting is a good idea. And I think to the extent that we can build alternative organizations, we better do it as fast as we can. Unfortunately, most of them are not in place at the moment.
Well, the left has been saying this, that we're not prepared and we can't do X, Y, and Z for 8 to 10 years.
I didn't say we can't. I said it's harder.
Okay, well, it's harder. The planning hasn't happened, and now it feels like we're maybe already past a point of no return, but certainly edging toward it. And I don't know. It feels like we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I find myself, exasperated even about what I'm supposed to be doing here on the
Right,
show.
but there's two ways of looking at it, and you can look at it in terms of practical results. That's probably not a good idea, given we're up against. I look at it as a moral imperative that it doesn't really matter whether you win or lose, but you must stand with the Palestinians. You must stand with our neighbors who are being ripped off the streets of our cities. You have a moral obligation to stand with them and accept the cost. Now, that is a different way of looking at resistance, because it's not defined by whether you succeed or you don't succeed.
I agree.
Okay.
I completely agree. So, so now what?
So what we people like us have to do is stoke, to the extent that we can, movement. So when I went to Italy, I took a film crew with me. And the reason I took a film crew with me is it's about to come out, we're almost finished with it, I wanted people to physically see what you have to do in the streets. And then I interviewed the people who organized the flotillas, Francesca, Yanis, Greta. So you have these incredibly brilliant resistance figures telling us, explaining why it's important. That's my role as a journalist. So, but I've been outspoken against Israeli apartheid and for decades, and it was very lonely. And I was just blanked out of one. I get an invitation to speak at the University of Pennsylvania, and then the Hillel House and AIPAC organized, and it's rescinded, and it's been constant. And only with the genocide, I think that Israeli mask is dropped, and people have seen the Zionist state for what it is. 14 years I fought on behalf of my friend Julian Assange, who honestly I didn't think was going to get out until Australia put enough pressure on the Australian government to get him released. So, 14 years is a long time. And I paid my own way to London because I hated the court coverage, because people didn't understand the case, including I would sit next to the Guardian correspondent who was clueless, which is what they wanted, by the way. The American society now is on the cusp of becoming a police state. It's on the cusp. We're talking maybe months at most. And so we have to do everything possible to resist. I work here in Princeton. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, so I work with this group called Resistencia. We have monitors out in the community warning our neighbors when there's ICE. I actually went and met all of the ministers in Princeton to try and get them to ring their church bells when ICE is in the. They haven't done it. They're probably still discussing it, but to ring the bells. That's my community, but everybody has to do that in their own community. We have to begin to build, and through the monitoring of Resistencia, you are building an alternative organization. You are building something that can function, hopefully, to help protect our neighbors. And that's really where all of our energy has to go at this point.
Why do I feel like I'm being told no? Why do I feel like there's a disagreement between us? Why do I feel like every time I say,
because you said the left, the left is always saying we can't do it now, we have to wait. And
yes.
And I don't know. That sounds more like liberals than the left.
No. I'm mean what I say.
Okay.
With all due respect and rest in peace, when Jay McAlevey was on the show many years ago, the book is no shortcuts. And obviously, I'm not trying to sit here and say, oh no, life is easy. Don't work hard. There's shortcuts everywhere. But we are confronting a reality. Like you brought up the Powell memo. We are looking at, 50 years of organizing with the greatest moneyed interests behind it toward completely taking over our media infrastructure, our political infrastructure, our court system, et cetera. We are getting hit with news story after news story every day, to your point, about not just the Ellisons and the like, and the Bezoses and the billionaires controlling the media, but the fact that every bit of back-end software on our phones and our computer and all of our devices it's all Palantir and Oracle, and they're listening to us. I said this to my mom a couple of weekends ago. I had a bit of a crash out. I think it was when they had arrested Don Lemon. I was like, I'm not trying to be funny, but they could literally kill Don Lemon in prison, and there's not a thing anybody can do about it or would do about it. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I was sitting in my apartment, and I was sitting by the window talking to my mom, and I said, I'm not trying to be alarmist or self-important, but if our government wanted to fly a drone and kill me through this window the way they did so many Palestinian journalists, there's nothing any of us can do about it. The Democratic Party's not going to do anything about it. You know, too hot, too real, and all the K-Hive would probably rejoice. And there's nothing to be done. Do you know what I mean? And that is an overwhelm. That's when I have this feeling like, okay, we're already beyond. Like, we've crossed the Rubicon. We're already to no man's land. And now we're just sitting around hoping like norms and values are going to be enough to keep the train on the rails.
So I don't think we've crossed the Rubicon yet. Because
why not?
Because you and I are still able to have this conversation. I mean, if you go to Turkey, it's dead. You can't do it.
But Chris, it could change tomorrow.
It could change quickly. That is true. That is true.
Accommodated right now.
Yeah, that is true. It could change really quickly. But right now, there's still some space. I mean, I am still able to. I mean, I went to Trenton because they wanted to pass the IHRA. They're going to pass it. I went with Roz Siegel, who's Israeli. He's the great scholar on genocide. And he and I were supposed to speak before the committee. Well, it was filled with Zionists who were shouting us down. And we were arguing that you can't pass this because it shuts down free speech. And they muted his mic. And then when I spoke, they muted mine. So there we were arguing that the passage of IHRA, which is the definition of anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel, would shut down free speech while they actually were shutting down our speech. So yeah, we're really close, but we're not.
Did you see the official? I forget who he was. Who was some politician who was criticizing the Olympians for saying, "I don't agree with everything that my government says," and he's basically like, America is the freest country in the world. They better shut up.
Right.
You know.
Any person who goes to the Olympics to represent the United States and then says they don't want to represent the United States should be immediately stripped of the Olympic uniform.
Yeah. So we're not there yet. We're getting closer and closer. And you're not wrong to be as pessimistic as you are about the lethal power of the state and the willingness of the state to use that lethal power. They were thrown by the killing of this nurse because it was filmed. And it was just an execution, cold-blooded execution. And the tragedy of it is that the guy was trying to help a woman. I mean, it was just appalling. And I mean, but what they'll do is it'll become a criminal activity to film ICE. I mean,
yeah, they're already going for that.
Yeah.
So then what? But what you're describing, Chris, is a kind of a ball rolling down the hill and picking up steam.
Yeah.
And the expectation that the ball is going to have less velocity at some point in the future, as opposed to right now.
I don't have that expectation. But I want to make life as difficult for them as I possibly can. I mean, I don't want to make it easy for them. I mean, I sued Obama when he passed Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, which overturned the Posse Comitatus Act, a gift to Trump, which prohibits the deployment of military forces in the streets of American cities. I didn't think I was going to win, but I wasn't going to let it go. I mean, in fact, I won. That's the amazing thing. I won in the district court, then they bumped it up to the appellate's a long story, and Obama, they managed to deny my standing because it was so blatantly unconstitutional. So they just denied my ability to bring the case. But that's always been, I was a war correspondent. I couldn't stop the war. I couldn't stop Israel from bombing Jabalia. I couldn't stop the Serbs from shelling Sarajevo. I couldn't stop the Serbian paramilitaries from carrying out massacres in Kosovo, but I documented it and I made it harder for them to do it. And I think that, that's all we can ask of anyone, that they have the moral and physical courage to get out and attempt to obstruct the machine. But I do think that it's important that we realize that it's not going to be easy, and that if we become effective, the way Roger and Just Stop Oil did in Britain, they're not going to play around. It's going to be really ugly.
I agree. And that's why it feels to me necessary to have as many people doing it as possible.
Of course, the larger, and you're right about the 3%, but that you're talking, what's 3% of, that's 9 million people, right? In the U.S., roughly. I'm not a math.
Sure. There's about 300
million. And, right. So you're right about that. But that actually takes, even though it's only 3%, that's quite an achievement.
Right. But here's what I would like to hear. I would like to hear political commentators, people like myself and people who have much bigger platforms than myself, say there have been X millions of people involved in pro-Palestine protests, No Kings protests, Black Lives Matter. What was it? Black Lives Matter was 20 million people, if I recall correctly, that were mobilized 6 years ago. That's twice as many as the 3%. That's twice as many as the 3%. Yeah, and people who were at least were willing to put their bodies in a position where they were physically voting for a policy change that never happens, by the way.
And now we might as well be ruled by the Klan. I mean,
right. Okay. But what I would like to, but Chris, before we go backward, what I'm saying is I would like someone talking to those people saying, not you don't have power, not, oh, how horrible is it that you have to bend the knee to get Biden elected over Trump, but to say you do have power. And if those 20 million of you chose to blockade your local Amazon or your local Whole Foods instead of walking up and down the designated protest zones that you got a permit for,
I'm totally with you
then
on
the
that.
country could change.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that. I'm just saying that takes a lot of organization. It doesn't happen quickly. Flash mobs, because of social media, can happen overnight. But building...
Well, I'm going to start by saying it. I can barely get the words out, Chris. Can I just say it? I want to start by saying it.
Okay.
If the 20 million of you that once walked for George Floyd, or the however many millions of you that walked for Palestine, or the however many millions of you have walked against Trump for No Kings, chose to walk differently in different places with a different kind of goal, which is to stop commerce at some of these egregious institutions. I don't even know where bombs are shipped out of in America. What ports those are. Virginia, Newport News. Those are the shipping yards where my grandfather once worked. Somewhere there's a bunch of civilians that have been marching around Virginia righteously that could have marched their asses down to the dock and maybe change the consciousness of dock workers or made dock workers feel like they were supported in case they want to try to become the muscly Italian men that you described a moment ago. That's all I'm saying. I think we should give ourselves permission to say what needs to be done, even if we're not.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And let's not erase Oakland here. I mean, Oakland's been great. And Oakland they shut down the port during the Occupy movement. But Oakland's a politicized city. I mean, the roots of political radicalism in Oakland run deep. And I don't think that's coincidental that Oakland has, especially on the docks, have been very effective. But that's been true for over a century, by the way. I mean, so, I'm totally with you. I'm not arguing with you at all on this. But I'm terribly worried that we are very vulnerable at a moment and that time is running out, that we have very little time left.
I certainly agree with you on that one. We also have very little time left, you and I, on this podcast. So I want to make sure that I ask you about Chomsky. He's come up. Obviously, there has been some ambivalence among some quarters of the left to criticize Chomsky in light of his scholarship and how he has been a sort of intellectual and moral foundation for so many people on the left. After he was revealed to not just be in the Epstein files, but to have a sort of deeper relationship with Epstein than was immediately apparent after the first dropping of the files at the end of last year. You have not demonstrated such ambivalence. You wrote a piece that I think was very well received by many on the left. You start by saying, I don't expect much from politicians, corporate tycoons, the presidents of prestigious universities, billionaire philanthropists, celebrities, royalty, or oligarchs. They live in narcissistic and hedonistic bubbles that cater to their self-worship and moral depravity. But I do expect a lot from intellectuals such as Noam Chomsky. Why did you feel like writing this? And what was your approach to coming to terms with how you were going to react to the revelations?
Well, I know Noam. I've known Noam many years. We're friends. I hated writing that. But when I read the letter from his wife, Valeria, I was appalled because it was the formulaic letter everybody who's been outed in the Epstein files writes. Oh, we were too trusting. Oh, we didn't investigate enough. Oh, we never saw anything inappropriate. We side with the victims, and it's garbage. They all knew that he was abusing women, including Chomsky. You'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind, especially after his second arrest. The nickname is Jet Lolita Express. I don't know if he did it, but that's how it was referred to. Chomsky certainly knows who Nabokov and Lolita, the novel Lolita, is, and they didn't care. And I wrote in there that Chomsky wasn't fooled; he was seduced. I hated writing it because Chomsky as an intellectual has been foundational for me, and I have admired his stances on so many issues, including Palestine. But he got seduced. He got seduced by that world, those jets, the dinners with Woody Allen and Ehud Barak, although I don't know why anyone would want to have dinner with Ehud Barak.
That in some ways is the craziest part. I mean, I don't want to say looking the other way over child molestation isn't the craziest part, obviously, but given Chomsky's politics,
I know.
The hobnobbing with an Israeli prime minister and
I know.
War criminal.
Yeah, I know.
How do you even understand that?
I mean, I think if you read the exchanges between Chomsky and Valeria Chomsky, his second wife, with Epstein, it's clear she's the one who loves it. And they were staying in Epstein's apartments in New York. They visited his ranch. They flew on his jet. Epstein gave Noam financial help, but the idea that these people didn't know. I mean, you can see in the emails they make jokes about it. It's kind of funny to them. Everybody knew. And it's inexcusable. And, especially for Chomsky, who understands the nature of capitalism, it's how it's designed to exploit and prey on the vulnerable, especially girls and women. He understands the cruelty of the ruling elite, the utter indifference to the lives of the people they subjugate. And he knew all that. So I don't know how he siloed Epstein away from it. I mean, wasn't his mansion the biggest mansion in New York City or something? I mean, how did he silo himself from it? And that willful blindness. I mean, James Baldwin brings it up, that willful blindness. It may not be evil, but it's an accomplice to evil. And it's not defensible. And it's not any more defensible among white Americans than it is among those people who ran in Epstein's circle. And so it was I struggled with it because there's so much I admire about Noam. And yet when I read that letter, it was just, and also I think with the latest dump, we understood that this wasn't one dinner. And, there was a sustained, including Chomsky giving Epstein advice on how to handle the press that was investigating Epstein's crimes. I mean, Chomsky certainly understood what those crimes were. And coming out as a war correspondent, having covered many wars, those of us who hate war most for what it does to children, having watched what it does to children. And so, it's really sad, and but it's not forgivable.
How do you understand Epstein's interest in Chomsky, having looked at, some of the conversations they had, the ideas he mooted? There was some virality around an exchange where Epstein was sort of pushing some race science, and Chomsky pushed back, and it was maybe mischaracterized as Chomsky agreeing with the race science, but certainly he seemed to be wanting some kind of intellectual validation from Chomsky. There were conversations about, is this Marxism? Is this socialism? Is this, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, so he was trying to rehabilitate himself and give himself a veneer of respectability. And that's a figure like Chomsky served that interest. I mean, I know him as brilliant. He's one of those brilliant. Unfortunately, I know Cornel West, I knew Susan Sontag, and I know Noam, all of whom make me feel humble and illiterate. How Chomsky could find someone like Epstein intellectually engaging mystifies me. I've spent hours with Noam, and you're up on Olympian heights at that point when you're dealing with a mind like that. But yeah, I think it was a way to give him cover, give him respect. It's why all these cretin billionaire philanthropists like Bill Gates, who's of course all over the Epstein files, they seek to use philanthropy as a way to mask their own rapaciousness and greed and the cartels that they create and the monopolies that they create. And so that's what he was doing. And Chomsky was wonderful window dressing that way for him.
But why Noam Chomsky? I mean, obviously it wasn't exclusively him. It was Steven Pinker and Larry Summers and a bunch of Harvard folks, the Obama lawyer lady. Like, there were a lot of prestigious people. But it is an interesting choice to pick the foremost left public intellectual.
That's speculation, Brianna, but I think it was driven by Valeria. I think she loved being in those circles. And, when I was with them together, she micromanaged his life. Almost when do you sit down and when do you stand up? And I think that this is a guess. But
Sure.
My supposition is that she really enjoyed it. And we see from the emails, she's quite solicitous to Epstein, and I think Chomsky got pulled into it. I don't think his first wife Carol would have spent 5 minutes with Epstein.
I ask in part because I recently did an episode with Gabriel Rockhill, who wrote this book, Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism, where he talks about the ways in which various political figures and even kind of pop cultural figures have been co-opted and criticized in that episode Chomsky as someone who always had a criticism for actually existing Marxism, and in some ways was intentionally or not, was a more acceptable to the establishment avatar of Marxist beliefs than someone who might have pushed more for for change to have happened, or validated actually existing Marxism in the world as a model for America or other kind of Western actors who wanted change. And in light of the Epstein files revelations, of course, it's going to raise questions about the extent to which he was maybe elevated for that purpose. I'm also thinking about the Epstein revelation, where they're kind of chatting, joking about how we're not going to have protests in the streets because we let Jay-Z do the Super Bowl, right? It breeds a sort of skepticism about a lot of the figures in a lot of different disciplines who have managed to rise to the top, and whether they did so organically or whether strings are being pulled by folks to give us the veneer of freedom and the veneer of revolutionary action and the veneer of academic freedom, et cetera. And I wonder if any thoughts you have about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, Chomsky's always been shut out. He's not a figure like Pinker that's celebrated by the establishment. So his politics were always an anathema to the establishment. I know Marxists don't like him because of his critique, in particular, of the Soviet Union. He identifies, as I do, finally, as an anarchist. Why? Because you had the creation of the Soviets. The Soviets were diffuse power centers where workers ran their own factories. With the October Revolution under the Bolsheviks, which Chomsky calls a counter-revolution, and then the slogan was all power to the Soviets. They destroyed the Soviets and consolidated power into the Bolshevik Party and Lenin, etc. That was his critique. And he insisted that he was a socialist. He identified as a socialist. But he said that the Soviet Union was just state capitalism. I agree with that analysis. I don't think I think that one has to differentiate those people who are Marxists. And by the way, I like Gabriel's work very much. I think he's very smart, very good. But you have to differentiate those people who, like, let's say, Rosa Luxemburg, who remain committed socialists, but became critics of the Soviet Union. And that's where Chomsky came from. That was where he came from.
So you don't think Chomsky was an op?
No. He didn't get much money for if he's an op. There are lots of ops out there, but also, yeah, no.
Oh, you think so? Are you prepared to name names?
Name names.
This is your chance. Let's take him down. We don't have much time left.
I got enough enemies, Brianna. I don't need any more.
Fair enough. Well, I'll leave you there. I would love to hear you and Gabriel Rockhill in conversation if you haven't done so already.
I've interviewed him, and I read at least one of his books. I like him. I mean, I'm very sympathetic. I find, just the short end of it is that I find Marxist analysis brilliant. I find Marxist's vision of a society utopian. That's really the breakdown.
Now you're forcing me to ask you because you've said I'm not a Marxist. You said I'm not a communist at various times in this conversation. Right. And so I have to ask you, why not?
Because I come out, I have a divinity school degree, as you know. I come out of Presbyterian. I come out of Calvin. I have a very dark view of human nature. And I believe power is always the problem, no matter who holds it. And I think as a journalist or as an intellectual, we must always be opposition in power. That doesn't mean, to hold power to account. And power is ultimately held to account, as Max Weber points out, through movements, through the power of movements. That's why he called politics a vocation, because the moment you stop putting pressure on power, power will consolidate more power at your expense. And this is, this is a 2-hour lecture reduced to 2 minutes. But that's why I have a very, very dark view of power and its capacity to corrupt. And I think that that's certainly in traditional Marxism. And you'll probably get lots of comments from Marxists who are telling me I'm wrong, and maybe I am wrong. I know just enough about Marx to make it look like I know something about Marx. I mean, I have read Capital and the 18th Brumaire. I mean, I've read, not Marx is quite voluminous. But yeah, that's it. I'm a socialist without question, but I'm kind of a Swedish socialist, the old Swedish socialist, where you had powerful labor unions. Capitalism existed within Swedish society, but was heavily restricted. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I gave a lecture in Canada, and when I finished, it turns out the economics department, they were all sitting in the back row, and one of the professors stood up and said, "Don't be fooled by him. He's just a radical Keynesian." And it turns out they were all Marxists, which can only happen in Canada. Well, they're not wrong, really. So, but this is a whole other show, and I don't claim to be an economist. I'm not. But I think a lot of it comes from my understanding of power and my understanding of human nature, and that both have to be held in check. None of it can be perfected.
And you think that Marxism is too utopian because it doesn't have the understanding that power always has to be held to account?
No, it believes in the withering. It believes in the withering away of the state. It believes in the idea that human nature can be molded to create an egalitarian society, and I don't agree. I think human nature, there's an inevitable kind of darkness. If we want to go back to theology, we'll call it sin. There's an inevitable darkness within all of us, and I think that there is always a tendency, no matter what the power structure is, for those in power to consolidate more power at our expense. And I don't really care what label you put on it.
All right. Well, the fight continues.
There you go.
For sure. Thank you very much, Professor Hedges, for joining us on the show
Brianna.
today. It's always such a pleasure. Did you want to tell the audience before you go where they can find more of you and your work on the internet?
Yes, chrishedges.substack.com. So everything, I have a YouTube channel, and So everything goes out there. Yeah.
For now. And by the way, Chris, when we were talking before about the kind of unsustainability and sustainability of our platforms, aren't you? I know Richard Wolff has been experiencing getting overwhelmed by these kind of fake AI videos of himself that are confusing folks as to what is
so is
real.
Mearsheimer.
Yeah, I mean, people have been arguing, Trump lately blamed AI for some pictures out of the Epstein files. And people are saying, well, this is the whole point of AI, to create an ambiguity where no one trusts their eyes anymore. And you can see literal photographic evidence of something. And reality is so distorted that there's no such thing as proof.
Well, that's probably not wrong. I mean, it's so sophisticated, you don't know what you're seeing and what you're not. I mean, yeah. I don't know if I'm a victim because, I'm not on social media. I have a wonderful guy in LA who does everything, but I can't even see my X account.
Oh, well.
I don't waste my time on any of it.
Bless you then. You've really cracked the code.
Maybe there's deep fakes all over the, I don't know. I have no idea.
It does not concern you. You're above all of that.
I don't know. If you see one saying that I'm a Marxist-Leninist, it's definitely AI.
That's the tell. Amazing. Thank you again, Chris. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Okay.
Take care of yourselves, everybody listening. And as always, remember to keep the faith.